Hi, everyone. This is Michael Luongo. I'm a freelance journalist and a UCLA Writing Professor, and I'm here with Karen Frances McCarthy. She and I met actually many years ago in Iraq when we were both journalists in Baghdad. And she is here with me because she has just published a new book this month called Till Death Don't Us Part, a true story of awakening to love after life.
Thank you, Michael. It's lovely to talk to you again. It's been quite a while since I saw you in Baghdad.
Definitely. Actually, that could lead us to one of our first questions. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the genesis of the book, but also transformation since then.
Since we met, as you know, when we were in Iraq, at the time, I was most definitely a fervent skeptic and atheist, and had been covering politics, and then went, as you know, to cover the war for a while. And when I came back, I went back to sort of covering politics. I was working on a book at the time, and I went down to Virginia to do some research and for an assignment. And while I was there, my fiance Johan, we had only just gotten engaged after about 4 years of knowing each other, and I had to leave. And when I was there, I got a phone call that he had died very abruptly in New York City. So rather than go back to Virginia or go back to New York, which I couldn't face, I stayed in a big old house in Virginia, and very, very strange things started happening there. And I'll read a couple of excerpts if you're interested later.
Sure, definitely.
Yeah. So all of these odd things started happening around the house. And first I thought I was losing my mind from grief, as you would. And but over time, it just became so persistent that I really started to, and I started to meet other people. I met a local priest and a pastor and some healers and different people I would never normally bump into. And they had an entirely different perspective on what was probably going on. I started doing my own research, and I had to come to terms eventually with the fact that the only thing that made sense was not my skepticism or my resistance or my secularism or anything, that the only thing that made sense was that consciousness does in fact survive death, physical death. And I actually discovered in the course of this my own mediumistic abilities, which I'd had as a child and had pretty much dismissed those by the time I was a teenager, came back really.
Many of us have experienced these sort of messages or however they're explained or
Most people do have these instances and write them off. Either it's their imagination or they're stressed or it's a coincidence, as you said. And it really, for me, I would have been like that had they not been so persistent. It was going on every day. So there was really, ultimately, I'd had no choice but to really start to investigate them. But it's unfortunate that all too often people do have these experiences and just write them off instead of actually looking into them or for what they could, the alternative they could signify.
how does your book protect Johann's legacy and the legacy of your relationship?
Really think about it as memory or legacy, because the relationship is still alive in its current form. One person's in spirit form, one person's in physical form. So it's very different, obviously, from the relationship that we had when we were both in physical form. But nevertheless, we have learned this new language and we have learned to be in this new type of relationship. So for me, it's really more about how we become present in these relationships going forward. But what I tried to do with this and with my experience was to really show a more contemporary, a more enlightened sort of approach to these ideas of, consciousness and energy and how we remain connected. And I practiced Buddhism for many, many years. So there's an element of that sense of interconnectivity throughout the book as well, which is why I think it's a little different from what we normally expect of these stories. So for me, really, the important thing in the book is to show how these relationships can continue. That what the continuous existence does is it takes away our existential fears, it takes away just that fear at all. And in taking away that fear, hopefully it allows us to live a little bit more kindly and with more compassion and with more love.
I think what would be really interesting for people out there is to hear in your own words parts of the book, to read some excerpts from the book. Would you be able to do that?
I went to bed that evening with my iPad and scrolled for something on Netflix to distract me from my past. A floorboard creaked. A shiver ran up my spine. I peered into the hallway with the uncomfortable feeling that someone was lurking in the shadows, but no one was there. Later, having watched a few minutes of everything and all of nothing, I drifted off. My iPad must have continued to pour faint flickers of light into the room until the battery died and the world fell to silence, broken only by the burp of a bullfrog, the hoot of an owl, and the heavy breathing of me sleeping. Creak. I jolted awake. The bed frame was groaning under a heavy weight. My heart raced. Someone had sat on the bed behind me, someone big, someone silent. Turn around, I told myself. I couldn't move. Turn around for God's sake, on three. 1, 2, 3. I flipped around. No one. I scrambled up, got tangled in the sheet, fell over, whacked my face on the windowsill and bounced back onto the floor. Pain scorched my head. Get up. My hands were shaking. I fumbled with the switch of the gaudy lamp. It flipped on, but no one was there. No one could have gotten down the stairs that fast and without a sound. I fumbled on the table for my phone to call 911 and then remembered it was in the kitchen. Shit. I picked up a glass Saratoga Spring bottle by the neck and crept down the stairs, peering into the dark, listening for any creak or rustle. No one could move in this house without the floors creaking. Except for the faint chirp of crickets and my own stressed breath, there was silence in every room and every stairwell, the whole way down to the kitchen, where I found the windows closed and the doors locked. No one could have gotten out. Then again, no one could have gotten in. I slipped onto the porch and sat down on the steps in a t-shirt and boy shorts, clutching the bottleneck with white knuckles, hearing nothing but the normal sounds of the night. After an hour of sitting out there in the dark, I decided that I'd imagined the whole thing and went back inside. Still, I stood in the doorway for a few minutes, afraid to move, listening, hearing nothing and no one. This was so stupid. 4 years earlier, I'd spent the summer crawling around in Iraq as an embedded journalist with the Stryker division out of Washington and the 210 Mountain division out of New York, washing with baby wipes and eating MREs to get a worm's eye view of the war. I waded through shit-filled creeks and hunkered down with the guys during rocket attacks in Sadr City. I walked in the footsteps of soldiers in front of me as we navigated IED terrain. I'd been crammed into Humvees in 120 pounds of body armor in 130-degree heat as we rolled outside the wire to bullets pinging off the metal and the gunner spinning his M2 in every direction. Now, here I was in rural Virginia with a bruise on my forehead from imaginings in the night. Stupid or not, I didn't have the courage to go back upstairs. I wandered into the library, the smallest and most defensible room in the house, and picked out a book called Classic American Decorating. I curled up in the throw blanket on the chaise and flipped mindlessly through the pictures. It was almost dawn before I was calm enough to sleep. As I began to doze, the air around me seemed to change somehow, growing warmer, softer maybe. A feather-like sensation brushed my forehead and burned both my eyelids like little kisses that felt strangely familiar, but I couldn't quite remember why.
Quite a striking section in the kitchen. So it's we're in your head and we're also in the space where you are, which is bringing us to that moment of realization for you as well.
Yeah.
Excellent. So again, Karen Frances McCarthy, and the book is Till Death Don't Us Part. Thank you.